you hear me? Is this one which is okay? So first of all, I want to thank the organization for inviting me to be in this colloquia. It's a great pleasure for me always to come here to the Institute. I'm in the other side of the city usually, but I really love to have the opportunity to come here near the sea, but also to exchange ideas with my colleagues and today with you. Before starting, I would like to add a comment to the previous question because I think it's very relevant, this debate and discussion sometimes with non-scientists, and often again and again is used the argue that science models cannot reproduce everything, we cannot rely on them, and the information they're providing us is not useful or is not valid. And I think that Claire made a very, very good point that models are currently very limited reproducing every process or every feedback of the system. And there are many things that we know from the past that currently these models are not able to reproduce. But I think that it's very important in these discussions as well to acknowledge what we really know for sure. And even though there is several uncertainties and there are many feedbacks that they need to be better implemented, there are basics in physics that is very clear when we go to the greenhouse forcing. The greenhouse forcing is there, is very strong, and the physics is very clear that increase in greenhouse forcing provides a warmer Earth. And we know very much from the past time, from the past record, that the climate and greenhouse forcing has always gone together. When we have greenhouse forcings, high concentrations in the atmosphere, the climate on the Earth has been warmer. But so from that point of view, I think that models do a good job. But when we want to go to details and when we want to understand the full feedbacks and when we want to understand the details of this future warming, we need to understand these feedbacks, and is the lack we have now, and we need more science to improve this, really. And I think that Claire did a fantastic presentation of the relevance of ocean circulation in climate. We know from the past that ocean circulation has been a key feedback. As Claire explained, insolation changes due to orbital movements were the triggers of these glacial interglacial cycles. But at the end, they cannot explain everything. And we know that feedbacks are the key. Feedbacks in climate. This non-linearity of the climate is really clear in the past record. So we need to understand how this non-linearity can work in the future. As Claire showed, ocean was very important for this non-linearity. And she showed this very fast climate variability of the glacial period, these rapid events, these Heinrich events, these Dansgaard-Oeschger events, which cannot be explained at all by insolation. It's pure instability of the climate system. And I want to say that only when these paleo records were produced at the end of the 90s, at the early of the century, only at the moment oceanographers started to realize that the deep ocean was important to observe, because deep ocean was important in climate. So the very first projects monitoring the deep ocean were launched at the 2004 with the RAPID project, where a lot of funding came from the UK, from Norway, from the States, from Holland, devoted to study the deep ocean. And that projects were launched after realizing about these records that Claire showed you on the Heinrich events, on the Dansgaard-Oeschger, because it was the very first proof that the deep ocean matters. A deep ocean produces changes that is changing the climate. So there's the big question now how these changes on ocean can affect it to the future. And now, what I want to do now in my presentations is carry you to a very small ocean. Claire showed the big picture, how big the ocean is, the relevance of the Atlantic Ocean in the global climate. I'm not going to claim that Mediterranean Sea is the driver of the global climate. But I think that it still is interesting to look to the Mediterranean because it's a hot spot in terms of the amplification of climate change. It has been for the past, and at the present is amplifying the changes, and it's going to be in the near future. And it's also relevant because many of us live around the Mediterranean, and it's a very high populated sea. So any change in the Mediterranean is going to be important for many cultures or economics or whatever, how you want to express it. And also I will argue that potentially some changes in the Mediterranean can also have effect in the global system. Well, a bit tiny, a bit modest, but potentially also might have a bit change. So I want to try to explain now here what we can play with the paleo record and which information we can add in the context of the Mediterranean. And I'm going to try to provide an introduction, a large introduction talking about a bit of the Mediterranean to let you to understand a bit the Mediterranean system. But I will end with showing you some results, new data that we are producing in the context of some projects, some new results that are not published. But I think I was motivated to show you this before today here. Okay, this is connecting with Claire's talk, where we have this global system, circulation system that is very relevant for climate, and any perturbation in this global system is going to be strong implications in the climate. That happened in the past, is actually already happening today, and as Claire showed you, is likely to happen in the future. One important subject is also the consequences of these changes. And one of the many consequences are in terms of the oxygen. And I show you that actually I took this reference from a seminar that Eva gave last week in our university. We are exchanging seminars. And she used this reference, which is a very nice paper analyzing the potential changes in the oxygen content. And what I wanted to show here, I wanted to show this connection between oxygen and circulation. Here we have this is the Atlantic Indian Ocean, and this figure looks very much some of the figures that Claire showed you before, where you can see this overturning circulation. Here we have the water mass coming from the North Atlantic, and we can see that oxygen changes are related to this circulation. And what is important, that ocean is one of the main sources of oxygen. And what we know now, this oxygen content in the ocean is changing and is likely to change in the near future. The reasons are because warming reduces the solubility, and also because weak ventilation stratifies the ocean and reduces the oxygen production and the oxygen of the ocean. So I wanted to highlight here this connection between oxygen and circulation, because later on I will take it back to focus in the Mediterranean. I will take a while, but I will arrive there. Okay, now I'm going to try to do this jump from the Atlantic, the global ocean, and the Mediterranean. And this figure is very similar to the phosphate figure plot that Claire showed you before, but here is with salinity. We have this is this Atlantic transect, and we see these different water masses, the Atlantic water masses, the Antarctic ones. So we can see represented. I love this figure. I always show this figure in my classes, and I spend half an hour discussing of this figure. So we are not going to do this today, but I really observe this figure. Many things are here. But now I want to highlight this part here, because it's the part which led me to go to the Mediterranean, which is this salinity anomaly here, high salinity, that belongs to the exit of waters coming from the Mediterranean. So Mediterranean Sea is this tiny basin here, but also has a sort of impact into this Mediterranean. It's an exit of warm waters, but also particularly salt waters into the Atlantic Ocean. Here we have a plot of the Mediterranean circulation. We are getting into the Mediterranean, and it's a Thermohaline system where we have these relatively fresh waters coming into the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar, which will be this. Here we will have the Atlantic Ocean, and these Atlantic waters come in surface. They do a trip around the Mediterranean, where it has two very differentiated basins, the eastern one and the western. Here is the Sicily Channel. And while this trip is done, here we have this figure with values on salinity. We can see this change of color, which represents change in salinity. Because the Mediterranean Sea is an evaporation basin. Climate over the Mediterranean and over the continents around the Mediterranean is very dry, is very arid. That means that there is more evaporation, the precipitation, that changes salinity, that changes the oxygen isotopes as well, but I'm not going to talk today much on that. I love them, are fantastic, but today I will talk about other proxies. It changes salinity, oxygen isotopes, but at the end, if you increase salinity, water masses are heavier. If they are heavier, they are not stable in surface and enter in the interior, forming intermediate waters, but also deep waters masses. Okay? Here there is the formation of the Levantine. This is Levantine intermediate water, and this is the Eastern Mediterranean water, the Western Mediterranean waters, and these water masses, sorry, I'm going to jump here and then we'll come later here. These water masses are formed in different locations of the Mediterranean. These are the convection cells, are the locations where this dense water become unstable in surface and enter in the interior of the Mediterranean. And I want you to know this is the Levantine intermediate water cell where fills the intermediate layer. This is the Aegean, the Adriatic, which form the Eastern Mediterranean deep water, and this is the Gulf of Lion where it forms the Western. This convection is very much related to winter mixing, winter cooling, and winter evaporation, where finally this already evaporated water, already salty water, is in these cells where they become finally unstable enough to enter in the interior. Finally, these water masses find their way out to the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar, and they form the so-called Mediterranean outflow water. I'm coming backwards now. And we can trace this water mass through the Atlantic Ocean. Here, these are new results from a cruise we had last year in the context of this project, Transmo. These are results which are coming from a master thesis from Pau Abelló, and he could trace the percentage of this outflow through these transects. So we can see that it's very present in the Iberian margin, and it's losing this signal towards the north. But it has been traced a bit, this water mass towards the north, and hypothesized the potential impact of these salt waters into this Atlantic overturning circulation. There is a discussion on that, whether this influence is directly by the participation of this water mass in the convection of the Atlantic, a bit unlikely potentially because this loss of the signal. But anyway, the mixing with central waters in Mediterranean provide an extra source of salt that at the end contributes to the overturning in the Atlantic Ocean. What is important to study this circulation? So in some way, Mediterranean is very sensitive to climate change. It's very sensitive and is reacting very fast. And we already know that from the present day. The current warming situation, the current enhancement of aridity in some areas of the Mediterranean, even the building of dams that provide less fresh water to the Mediterranean, or the extra use of these water resources by us, have changed the salinity of the Mediterranean. And that has been already observed. This is a study where it's observing changes in the properties of the Western Mediterranean deep water mass. Actually, this change in properties is transferred from the Eastern. We did have a change in the patterns of production of Eastern Mediterranean deep water mass, which has been transferred to the Western. We see that this property is very fast. 2006, 8, 10 is transferred through the water column. Here we have a more recent study where we see for the different years how temperatures is getting warmer in the deep water mass. of the Western Mediterranean Sea, and that is transferred to the Atlantic Ocean through this warming of this deep water mass of this Mediterranean offshore water is becoming warmer and warmer. It's slightly, it's not a big warming, but in terms of from the point of view of oceanography, it's a very significant warming and it's very important warming. Also, we know from future projections, as Claire showed you before, for the global thermohaline system, for the global meridional vertical circulation, there are projections which indicate a lowering of the system. And also in the Mediterranean Sea, we have some projections that suggest a weakening of the system in the Mediterranean for the end of the century. Where some more recent models, using regional models from the Mediterranean, have tried to modelize the different cells. But they observe that the response of the different cells is not the same. It's different for the different individual cells. In general, they observe that the Asian Sea, there is an increase potentially, but a strong decrease in other cells like the Gulf of Lions. So it means that it's complex response. Not necessarily every cell has to react in the same way. There is still many questions on these projections and how the sensibility of this thermohaline system. And I believe that from the past we can learn a lot of things. We have many questions because, first of all, we don't know what is the natural range of variability of this system. We are trying to do projections. We are looking to the records, but these records are so short. But we don't know how this system oscillates, what is the internal noise and the variability of the Mediterranean thermohaline system. And we don't know what it have been changes in the past, which are actually the forcings, what are the causes of these changes. And when we introduce a change in the system, a forcing, changing the properties, what is the individual response of each of the cells? Are all of them responding at the same time, together or not, and what the impact that they have in the outflow? So there are many questions which are not answered today. We are far now to be able to answer them, but this is a bit the motivation of the work we are doing now currently in some of our projects. And now I'm going to try to give a bit of some of the information we already have. Some of them is focused in this rapid glacial variability that Claire mentioned before. This is information, some of this information I did work during my earliest stage of science. Some of this is very much published and very well known for many different authors. But the second part, I'm going to show you new data we are working now. Okay. So let's start now to focus at what we know about this Mediterranean thermohaline circulation during this rapid climate variability that Claire described before, when we have these Dansgaard cycles. If you remember before, we had this rapid climate variability during the last glacial period, variability which cannot be explained by the orbital forcing. We have these interstadial periods, intervals of time with relatively warm, stadials, colds, and these cycles were named with the name of Dansgaard, Osgaard, very easy to pronounce. You can use DO cycles, it's easier, but I introduce you the guys that are responsible for these names. And as Claire explained very well, I was hoping you, Claire, that you would use these figures, and you did. Thanks, great, thanks. We were planning to exchange slides before, but as usually, we always run at the very last moment producing it, so I was finishing this last night. I couldn't send to Claire, so I was just thinking, what Claire we show? So, great. So these figures, I sorry that I didn't reference it because it comes from Ranstorff, Stefan Ranstorff paper that actually you will have a talk on Thursday from him. And he was one of the very first proposing these major changes, reorganization of the Atlantic circulation relating to this climate variability. We know today from many data, as Claire showed you, that the Atlantic Ocean was a major amplifier of this rapid climate variability. We still have a lot of questions about the ultimate driver, the causes of these initial changes, but we know for sure that the ocean become a major feedback on this climate variability. But now I want to go to the Mediterranean. What happened in the Mediterranean during this rapid variability? So what happens in our ocean? So I'm going to go back to my earliest times during my PhD, when Eva and myself, we were working together in the lab doing alkenones. Alkenon is a proxy for sea surface temperatures. Today I'm not going to talk much about these records. But as you can see here, this is a record that actually I did produce during my PhD, where we can see all these hundreds events that Claire described. This is Greenland, as Claire showed, and now here I'm showing the Mediterranean Sea. And we see that indeed this rapid variability did a major effect in the temperatures of the Mediterranean Sea. So the Mediterranean was very sensitive to what happens in the Atlantic Ocean. That was shown for the glacial period, and I think now models are showing as well that in the current conditions, Atlantic is very key determining the Mediterranean circulation. So these are surface temperatures. These are anomalies of this polar foraminifera that also Claire showed before. And we saw that when you have this hundreds event, this armada or icebergs, polar water, almost polar water was coming into the Mediterranean Sea. But now I want to go to the interior. I want to talk about the Mediterranean thermohaline circulation. So I'm going to go to the deep Mediterranean, to the mid-Mediterranean. Well, sorry, before I want to stress that to have this entrance of polar waters into the Mediterranean, that means that really this tropical air have to move southwards and make possible to arrive these very cold waters into the Mediterranean. We know from the Iberian margin that the icebergs, these IRDs that Claire was talking, arrive here at this margin. So this is consistent with the signal we are showing. My records before were coming from this part of the Mediterranean. Now I'm jumping to the interior of the Mediterranean. As Claire before already talked about the oxygen, but now I'm going to focus now in the carbon, as Claire said before, and see, I was very lucky that she explained very well before that this proxy is related to circulation of the ocean. It's related to nutrients, and when we have less ventilation, less production of new water mass, there is more remineralization of organic matter, and this proxy reach higher values because more organic matter become remineralized. So our interpretation, this is from the Mediterranean Sea now, we see that this rapid climate variability also involves major changes in the circulation of the Mediterranean Sea. So that teleconnection within the Atlantic or the Mediterranean did not only happen through the ocean, through the entrance of polar water through the Strait of Gibraltar, but to let this happen, we need also atmospheric teleconnection, because formation of these deep water masses are very much controlled by winds in the Gulf of Lions, so we also need the atmosphere to react. And that's consistent with what we already know also about vegetation over Iberian. So this rapid reorganization of the Atlantic involved major changes, not only in the ocean, also in the atmosphere, in the vegetation, in the deep oceanography. We are talking about very, very strong changes in climate. And that was the model that a bit long ago published, explaining this variability. Really, when we have these stadials, cold events, we have more stronger winds, and that led to the deep well ventilation of the Western Mediterranean Sea, in opposite to these interstadial periods or Khalid periods. But if any of you manage to remember Claire's records, probably not, no problem, because look to the value records is difficult. But our carbon record was opposite with the Mediterranean Sea. This, well, it's not exactly the record that Claire showed, but she was showing similar records to here. This is coming from the Iberian margin. And from the Iberian margin, this is the carbon 30, and it's similar to some of the records that Claire showed. And this is the ones I'm showing now from the Mediterranean. And look that the axes are in the same direction, and that direction indicates towards the bottom with lower values, reducing over tuning. So look at this, really, Mediterranean Sea and Atlantic Ocean were reacting in the opposite direction. Okay? One, the circulation was weaker in Atlantic, but in the Mediterranean was stronger. And that was because the drivers in the Atlantic is the melting, and that makes the convection reduce. But the Mediterranean was mostly this atmospheric change in precipitation. It was more arid conditions in the Mediterranean, more evaporation, stronger winds, and that helped to the Bertolini. So these thermohaline systems, they were working in opposite direction. Here, well, a bit the next question will be, what are the consequences? That these changes in the Mediterranean, did have any impact into the Atlantic? So now we are going to move to the Gulf of Cadiz, which is the area which receives the influence of this exit of Mediterranean waters. I want to point out that often you will see this MD in our records, and Claire used also many of these MD cores. And just I will make the reference that MD means Marion Dufresne, which is that ship, that boat that Claire was showing to you, which that boat has provided to us some of the best records we have to do high resolution as we are using here. I mean, those cores from that ship has changed a lot the knowledge that we have nowadays on the paleoceanography. Now I'm going to jump to the Gulf of Lions. Sorry, I always change Gulf of Lions and Gulf of Cadiz. I'm moving to the Gulf of Cadiz. Sorry. Okay. And for that, I'm using here, we have always Greenland for reference. Here we have in dark green the same curve from the Mediterranean from before, but in light green, I'm using one from here, from the Gulf of Cadiz. Here is location which resides this Mediterranean outflow water. And we can see that the carbon 13 is doing a very similar pattern within the uncertainties of our dating, and is actually monitoring what is happening in the Mediterranean. These reductions in ventilation during the cold phases of this variability. And what this record here means energy of the system. This is grand size measurements with the stronger currents. And with values in the towards up indicates stronger currents here. So we see that really when we had these cold stadials, we had this entrance into the Atlantic, or this exit, it depends how you look at it, this exit of Mediterranean water, more saltier water, more Mediterranean water in the Atlantic. That led to hypothesize in this paper from Antia Walker, led to hypothesize potentially in this moment of weaker circulation in the Atlantic, probably this enhanced flow of salt into the Atlantic could have a role trying to turn back to the Atlantic system, to the normal when we understand normal system, when the overturning is operating in full conditions. And that's an hypothesis which has to be tested now. Now I'm going to the second part of the story. I wanted to connect with Claire, talk with this rapid climate variability from the glacial period, where I have shown you that really indeed the Mediterranean thermal circulation changed during this rapid climate variability. These were very strong changes in the Atlantic, but not in the Atlantic, in the whole planet. But now we are going to move to another period of time, more recent, during the last deglaciation and the Holocene, the current Holocene. And actually, it was during this period when we had the strongest changes in the Mediterranean thermal circulation. And what we are showing here is a picture. Yeah, you can see this is from the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. And the Eastern Mediterranean Sea has the ability to provide very colorful sediments. It's beautiful to describe sediments in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. And used to the Western, it's so boring. It's just gray, 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 gray. You don't see anything exciting. 2 weeks ago, we were opening course from here, from the institute in our university, from the Alboran Sea. They were gray, 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 boring. But look at that, this is fantastic. But it takes more time to describe. But these changes are because these colors are telling something about changes in the thermal circulation of the Mediterranean Sea. And this is the last sapropel. If you Google last sapropel, you will get thousands of papers. It has been very, very lonely studied. And there is a lot on that. If we know quite a lot of things about the sapropels, but I will say not everything. And one of the things we know about the sapropel is that they are related about the rains over the African continent. And here we have two different situations. One, which is interpreted happened during this sapropel formation, that they will have, as you say, very more humid conditions over Africa. This is the Green Sahara, when there were Sahara were populated by many, no cities, because there were no cities at the moment, but there was many human settlements in the Sahara, okay? And that was, at the early of the Holocene, which the Holocene is the current interglacial, because these Milankovitch cycles, because these orbital configurations, we know that the early part of the Holocene, the ITCZ, this intertropical convergence zone, was located further north. And that will drive these humid conditions that led to fresh water coming in the Mediterranean Sea, particularly in the eastern Mediterranean Sea, and was the driver of this sapropel. It has been longly studied. Later on, because these orbital changes, the ITCZ went back southward position to the position more or less that is today, and we had this very dry Sahara. I will go into just a short input that one of the information that has provided is that many of the water resources that nowadays are being used in this region come from this period of time. So what means that the water resources that are being used nowadays, they take about 20,000 years, not euros, years, 20,000 years to recover. That's important to know when we think on sustainable management of water. So many of these resources coming from that period of time. But today, I'm interested in that period because we are trying to understand what changes occur in the Mediterranean thermohaline circulation during this period of time. I'm a Western Mediterranean person mostly. And here, what I'm doing is comparing the Western Mediterranean Sea with the Eastern. Here we have the sapropel I was talking before. S1 refers to sapropel. Here are the age. The Holocene started here. Here we start the last interglacial. Here we have this temperature reconstruction that I use very much from the Alboran Sea to show when it was cold, glacial, interglacial. So during this Holocene occurred this change, the sapropel, driven by these orbital changes. This has been very longly studied. But now what I'm showing here is one thing which has not been so studied, which is this organic rich layer. There were no black sediments like this, a bit darker because they come from the Alboran Sea, and as I told you before, it's boring. But it was a bit darker, but it has this organic rich layer is very well expressed when you look at the organic matter. These are alkanons formed by Emiliana Huxley mostly, and we show this enrichment in organic matter. So these two events has been studied independently. This event has not been so much studied. Actually, I did study during my PhD, and at that moment, I tried to publish a paper that was in 2000, trying to argue what was the connection between this event and this one. It was rejected. Often we talk about the papers which are published, and everyone thinks that we are publishing things and we are successful publishing, but very often we are not successfully publishing. So this is the story of a rejection. And of course, when you finish your PhD, you're trying to explain everything, and you think that you want to explain everything. And I wanted to explain this to us 2000, well, almost 23 years later. I'm trying to explain it still. And I don't have all the answers, but I think today I want to show you now, if I have time. Yeah, I think I have time a bit. What we have learned a bit about that. At that stage, as you can see, these events didn't happen at the same time. For a moment, when they were first discovered in the ODP in a big campaign, were first discovered, they didn't have any time constraint, and they were interpreting that they were synchronous. We like to think about simple things, and the simple things that everything happens at the same time. But when you start to study further, you start to see that things are always more complex. So they don't happen at the same time. Apparently, there is a period of time that they are overlap. But now, this event in the Western Mediterranean Sea, so we are comparing records from here with records from here. This event has been attributed to the changes in the freshening or the melting of the last deglaciation. Here you have the sea level curve. Claire has already shown you this, but with a longer period, and there was a smaller part, no? But here is extended, and this is the change we have from 130 meters through the deglaciation. And look, when this change starts to be more intense, is what happens this organic rich layer. So it has been attributed to the freshening of the last deglaciation and the entrance to the Strait of Gibraltar of freshest waters, and has been attributed to changes in the thermohaline circulation of the Western Mediterranean Sea. So that was our original idea. So let's see what we know now. And now I go back to the oxygen. At the beginning, I told you that I will say something about the oxygen. So I will tell you, go back. Until now, I've been using the carbon-13 as Claire. It's a fantastic tool. But when we go to the changes like this and this, the changes are so strong in oxygen that we cannot use anymore the carbon-13 because our benthic forams disappear. The oxygen is so low that they cannot survive. So our proxy disappears. And this has been one of the frustrating things about trying to reconstruct changes in the thermohaline circulation of the Mediterranean, that our proxies, we couldn't use the same proxies all the time because forams, they don't like to live in these conditions. So we don't have the benthic forams anymore. So that was a problem we had. And now is the reason I'm going to the oxygen. As you can see, this is also coming from data from this cruise from a project that we did a cruise from the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic following these Mediterranean waters. And here are the oxygen content. This is a strange plot, but this is Mediterranean, will be dispersed here. And this will be the Atlantic Ocean, this will be dispersed here. And what we can see, this is our oxygen values. And we can see that the Mediterranean waters can be followed very well as oxygen minimum, a relative minimum in oxygen in the Mediterranean Sea, in the Atlantic Ocean. But within the Western Mediterranean Sea, we can differentiate very much within the Levantine intermediate waters and the Mediterranean waters forming the Western Mediterranean by the oxygen content. So we have this relative minimum oxygen in the intermediate layer. And this is going to be relevant for what the story comes later on. I have to say that this oxygen, going back to the current conditions, we can see also this as information from a station that has a fantastic historical record. We can trace these Levantine intermediate waters very well as an oxygen minimum in this area here in the north of Mediterranean. And we want to do a temporal plot. We can see that changes in convection or deep mixing, indicating here for these white dots, are related to changes in this oxygen minimum zone. So it's a very sensitive feature to changes in the convection of the Mediterranean Sea. And we can see that has been changes in the recent time due to this new formation of new Western Mediterranean deep water. I don't go to the details, but I wanted to illustrate here the sensitivity of this system. So now we go to our proxy. And our proxy, we love forams, as Claire said. We do every sort of things with forams. But now I'm going to talk about another measurement where we measure not the actual foram, it's about what has been formed over the foram when they are dead in the sediment. These are ferromanganese crust, which are telling us about the conditions of the deep water mass. And we are using a ratio within uranium and manganese. These are two elements that have opposite behavior in front of the oxygen conditions, in such a way that when we have less oxygen in the waters, we have more uranium precipitation in these crust. We are trying to work in a sort of calibration where we can relate this oxygen content in the waters with the uranium manganese measured in this crust. Still, we would like to have more dots here, but we can see that there is a reasonable good agreement telling us that we have more uranium manganese values when we have less oxygen in the water column. So this is going to be the tool I'm going to use next to try to see what changes in the thermal circulation of the Mediterranean. Science, as I already told you, we don't have benthic forams because we don't like these extreme benthic conditions, but planktonics exist, are in the surface, sorry. So but that signal is incorporated in the foram post-mortem. So we are not analyzing anything about the habitats of the foraminifera. We are analyzing things about what happened in the bottom where these skeletons deposit. So that's our tool to try to continuously reproduce changes or reconstruct changes in the oxygen content. So now I'm going to show you in this plot different records from different depths. This is in the Western Mediterranean Sea. This is this oxygen minimum zone that I was showing before, the present day, and this is the location at different depths of what I'm going to show you here. Our starting point is this organic ridge layer, that this is the record I produced during my PhD. And the good thing about science, what makes science exciting, and in any field, that usually when you plan an experiment, you are assuming what is going to happen. But very often, it doesn't happen. And something new appears. And I think that is the motivation that you have to have in science, because we cannot predict everything. We have surprises. And when we have surprises, it makes our job more exciting, and also challenge our capacity of understanding what we are finding. So obviously, I was predicting that with this oxygen proxy, I will find exactly the same here. I was predicting exactly the same. And I will show you that now. So that is what we obtained. In some way, it's coherent. There is less organic ridge layer with less oxygen. It's plotted in such a way that you have less oxygen in the upper part, okay? So it's exactly the same core, so no uncertainties in the H model, but, well, okay, something is coherent, but other things is not. It starts earlier, surprise. It was not such a surprise, because we already know from the organic matter that something was happening here. And that's important, relevant, because it's the Heinrich stadial 1, this Heinrich 1, the onset of the deglaciation. Anyway. And the very big surprise, and that was even more surprise, I was not expecting that at all, is that actually this oxygen recovered before the ending of this organic ridge layer. So this last second part is more primary productivity, and it's not so much thermal circulation. That was the site here, here. We are here now. Now we are going to go here, and more surprise came. The next surprise was, look to the values here, 4,000, 1,000. It's a major change of scale here. We have really the low oxygen zone is mostly not in the bottom. It's low oxygen for the Western Mediterranean deep waters, but at 900 meters, we have even less oxygen, far less oxygen than at the present day. That was the very first surprise. It was absolutely unpredicted for me. And the other big surprise is, look at this, is ventilating earlier. Here the ventilation occurs here, and this is current earlier. And that's very exciting for me. That was very, very, very exciting, because at the same time we were doing some other things in other parts of the Mediterranean, using other practices that I'm not going to go into the details. But I'm showing here this orange curve, which is a curve here. This is the Sicily Strait. And these are neodymium isotopes. Paleoceanographers, we love isotopes, any kind of isotopes. We produce isotopes in many things that led to us to produce isotopes. And these are isotopes in earth rare elements, neodymium. I'm not going to the details, but I can show you this is a neodymium in the Mediterranean waters. And we can see that there are different signatures in different water masses. So this is our game. And what I want to highlight here is that in this position of the Sicily Channel, right at the moment we have ventilation in this intermediate water layer. Right at the moment we have a major event of waters coming from the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. And we know that come from the far east because the neodymium composition. They come from the Aegean Sea. They come from the Aegean Sea. So we can know which is actually the cell that is reacting. And that moment that this water mass appear, this intermediate water mass, is the moment that reventilates this layer, reventilates that. So we know that that happens to be in the younger dryas. And that's important, this event, because it's in some way referred as a potential analog of future conditions in terms of the arid conditions of the Mediterranean. Was more arid period, increase of arid conditions, and was very interesting to know absolutely unpredicted results as well. We were not looking for that, but we found that there is this major entrance of Eastern Mediterranean waters right at the reventilation. And look at that. We also observed this is the subpropel, a major reduction in the eastern source waters during the subpropel. We keep going up. 3 minutes. Okay. I show you the. So we see that these upper layers ventilate later when the subpropel occurs. I'm not going to go more in the details, and I'm going to escape that. Here I was connecting with the eastern and the western, and a bit the outline from here is that Eastern and Western Mediterranean are very much connected. What happens in one basin that in some way is controlling what happens in the other, but this connection is very complex. It's very complex, and it's so complex that I don't have time here to explain. But what I wanted just to end is that all these changes in the cells, green is Eastern, this other color is Western, and this red is Gulf of Cadiz intensity. We see that these changes in oxygen in some way are related to changes in the strength on the mole. So these changes in the thermal circulation of the Mediterranean that we are observing has a major impact in what is going out of the Mediterranean and is going into the Atlantic. And these were my conclusions in some of the details. We see that this organic layer history with the subpropel is far more complex than I thought 20 years ago when I tried to explain in that rejected paper, and was very well rejected. I can accept it now. And hopefully I will try to do something better in the near future. And I want to thank many people, because what I show you is the result of a big team of people and great people working with me. And some of the people also here is working because Cesar is also doing some work with us, and Carlas Blejero and Eva Calvo with us as well. So many of the results and ideas I show you here is part of the work of these people. Some of them are not yet providing ideas, but they're contributing in some way. And thanks for your attention.